So welcome. We are going to create a game today. This is based on an old dice game that I used to play called Pig. One thing that I haven't told you guys to do yet, and I'm just doing it briefly just to demonstrate, is if you plan on programming more outside this class, and frankly, even if you're just going to program inside this class, this is still a good idea. It's a good idea to label all your programs with what date you created them, what they are, if there's any techniques that you use that you're learning or whatever. Sometimes it's okay to tag those as well, because as you go forward, sometimes you'll have to do something and you'll realize, hey, I did this before, and you can go back and find your old code. If you kind of remember some information about it, you can search through all your Python files for stuff. So I always recommend you put comments at the beginning of a document like this. And in Python, a hashtag or # symbol, whatever you want to call it, indicates that that line is a comment. And a comment line is ignored by Python. It doesn't try to run it. It doesn't try to do anything to it. It just sits there. So sometimes when we want to comment our code, we want to put in notes to ourselves. And if you take advanced programming, you will have to add comments to all of your code, because we always put it in to help us when we go back to look at code to remind ourselves why we did certain things. But it's always a good idea, and I'm going to ask that you at least have a single line of comment, if not more, that gives the your name, the date, and the name of the program. So if you are watching this video, congratulations, thank you. If you're watching this video, I'm going to say things and do things at points during this video that people who just try to skim through it are going to miss, and it's going to make them not know what they're doing, and it's going to make them have issues. So watch the videos. It's going to be broken up into a couple of videos because I'm going to do several different things. In some cases, I'm going to add some code to show you something, and then I'm going to take it away later on. So just realize that that is going to happen. And again, if you're skimming through this fast, stopping, pausing, typing in the code, moving on, typing in the code, A, you're going to miss a lot of stuff, and B, you're going to type in a lot of stuff you didn't need to because it's not part of the finished product, and C, I'll know that you did that because you'll have typed in stuff that I specifically told you you don't have to type in. So, for starters, this is a dice game, and I'm going to explain the way the game works. The game works as such. You play with 2 dice, and you can actually have 2 or more people playing it, but we're just going to make a 2-player game. And you roll the dice. And if you roll whatever number you roll, that's how many points you get. So if you roll a 6 and a 5, you get 11 points. If you roll a 4 and a 4, you get 8 points. However, after you've rolled once, you can decide if you want to keep the points you have and put them on your score, or if you want to try to get more points by rolling again. So let's say you roll a 6 and a 5, and you say, I want to get more points, so you roll again, and you roll a 4 and a 4. Well, that's 8 more, so now you have 19 points. And again, you can decide, do you want to roll again, or do you want to keep the points you have? But here's the thing. If you roll a 1, if either of the dice is a 1, then your turn is over and you lose all the points from that turn. So if you roll a 6 and a 5 and have 11, and you say, yeah, I want to roll again, and then you roll a 1 and a 6, your turn's over, you get no points because you rolled a 1. If you roll a pair of 1s, not only do you lose all your points from that turn and your turn is over, but you lose all the points you've saved up the whole game. So that's basically how the game works, and we're going to start programming it, and it's going to hopefully make a lot of sense once we get that far. But for now, I'm going to give you some instructions to get you started, and I'm going to demonstrate stuff as we go. So first thing is we are going to need 2 external libraries for this. And we use the import statement to get those external libraries. The first one we need is random, and the second one we need is called OS. And I'll explain OS later. I'm going to explain random now. So one of the things we're going to do is in this game, and I'm just going to demonstrate first, is we're going to roll some dice, and we need it to randomly come up with a number. So if I say print random, and this is a line you don't have to type yet because I'm just demonstrating. If I say print.random.randint 1, I'm going to explain what this does in a second, 1 and 6. Okay, so randint is a function that generates a random integer, and it generates a random integer between the first number you give it and the second number you give it. So if I run this right now, it is going to come out over here, make me save it, and it's going to give me a random number between 1 and 6. If I run it again, it's going to give me another random number between 1 and 6, and so on. And it will continue to give me random numbers between 1 and 6, which we're doing a dice game. Dice has 6 sides, so they can go from 1 to 6. So this is what we're going to use. You could use other numbers. I could use 1 and 100, in which case it would generate a random number between, it would generate a random number between 1 and 100, which I'll show you here. So if I did that, whoops, what did I do? Oh, I deleted that and I needed it. So that generates a random number between 1 and 100. But like I said, we're doing dice, and so we really only need numbers between 1 and 6. Okay, so now this is a dice game, and we're not going to print out those just yet. This is a dice game, and so there's 2 dice, and so I'm going to actually create 2 variables. I'm going to call them die1, and I'm going to have a second one called die2. And I'm going to call this die2. So now this is like rolling a pair of dice. So if I were to print out this, it's going to be like rolling a pair of dice, and I'm going to get 2 numbers, a 2 and a 6. If I run it again, I'm going to roll the dice, a 6 and a 4. Roll it again, a 5 and a 4. And so this is just like rolling a pair of dice, which is what we need to do in our game. Now, I'm going to tell you eventually this is going to go inside a function, and just as a demonstration of functions, I'm going to create one, and I'm going to call this takeTurn. And takeTurn is going to have an argument, which I'm going to call x, and I'll explain what that means later on, but right now, for the purposes of creating our function, takeTurn is going to be a function that rolls 2 dice. Actually, I'm going to take out this for right now. I'll explain why later. So now, I just want to show you, I could run this right now, and nothing would happen. Matter of fact, even if I put a print statement, even if I put that, if I put this right here, what's going to happen? I guess when I run this, is it going to print out die1 and die2? Absolutely not, because I'm not calling that function. I'm not making that function run. If I want to make that function run, I have to call it. That's how I call a function. So def, it's a function. Nothing underneath here that's indented is going to run unless this function gets called, and I call it by just typing its name. So now if I were to run this function, I will see it's just like before. Just like when I had it outside the function, now it actually runs because I've called the function. And if I took this out, it would stop running again. I'm going to take it out because we're going to add some more stuff. Now, there's some more things we need to do in this. We need to keep track of people's scores. And I'm going to just call their scores player 1 score. And I'm going to set it equal to 0 to start with because they're not going to have any score. Some player 2 score. So now we have a variable to hold the people's scores as the game goes. Next thing I need to do is, since this is a turn-based game, we have to keep track of whose turn it is. And the way that we're going to keep track of whose turn it is using a variable, and I'm going to just call that turn. And I'm going to set it equal to 1 because player 1 is going to go first. And what's going to happen is, in our code, when the user decides they don't want to roll again, or their turn is over because they roll a 1, then turn is going to change, and it's going to change to 2, and then it'll change back to 1, then to 2, then to 1, and so on. And you could modify this game, and I may use this as a challenge later. You could modify it so that it asked how many people are going to play first, and then it used that many in turn. But for right now, we're just going to use a two-person game. All right, so I now have my variables that are going to hold the score. I can roll my dice and print out what comes out. But so far, it's not much of a game yet. So the next thing we need to do is we need to, inside of here, we need to figure out a way to make each turn run. And so we're going to think about how that needs to happen. So what needs to happen on each turn is that it needs to roll the dice. It needs to get the total. If there's a 1 in it, it needs to end that player's turn and tell that person that they lost their turn. It's the other person's turn. If it was if it didn't have a 1 in it, it's going to ask them if they want to roll again, and it's going to keep track of what their score for that turn is. If they roll a pair of 1s, it needs to go back and set their score to 0 and end their turn and turn it over to the other person. So we're going to add a little bit of that to start with. So I'm going to have a loop in here because we're going to have to give the person a chance to roll multiple times. But we don't know how many times to start with, so this is a perfect place for a loop. And we're going to create a variable, and we're going to call it roll. And we're going to set roll to yes, or y is what I'm going to use for that. So basically, what I'm doing is I'm creating a variable that's going to hold a y or an n, and if it holds a y, it means that the user is going to roll again, or can roll again. If it gets an n, there's going to be 3 reasons that it can turn to n. If the user says they don't want to roll again, it will be an n, and we won't go through this process again. If the user rolls a 1 or a pair of 1s, it will also turn to n because their turn will be over. Now, if you think about it, we're rolling the die inside their turn, so it actually needs to be the roll equals y actually needs to be before the dice get rolled. So I'm going to paste it up here. It's part of the function, so it needs to be in there. All right, so now we have roll equals y, and we need to have a while loop. But before we get to that, each time that it becomes their turn to roll, we need to have a score. We need to keep track of the score for that turn. So I'm going to call it turn score. So turn score is going to keep track of their score for each individual turn. And we're going to set turn score equal to 0. All right. So next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to create the roll. And so we're going to say while, because like I said, this needs to be in a loop. While roll equals, remember 2 equal signs. While roll equals yes. So as long as they haven't lost their turn because they rolled a 1 and they haven't said, no, I don't want to roll again, it's going to put stuff inside the loop. Now, the actual rolling of dice is going to be inside the loop. And that means that we actually need to indent it some. Now, I could just indent each of these. There's only 2 lines, but I want to show you a trick if you don't already know it, and it's how to indent multiple lines. And if you select several lines and you say Format, Indent Region, it will go ahead and indent all of those lines. So if you realize that you need to indent some, then you need to, or if you need to realize you need to indent multiple lines at once, you can highlight them all and use that indent. All right, so next we need to figure out what it is we do every time they roll. So the first thing we want to do is we want to say, or we want to roll the 2 dice using the random, right? And then we want to print out what they rolled. So I'm going to say print you rolled a comma die 1 comma and a die 2. So now what's going to happen is it is going to come up and say you rolled a whatever it is and a whatever it is. Now I want to show you a trick. So sometimes, normally when we use the input function, we're almost always going to set it to input equals something or other. But there's one other time we want to use an input to pause our function to look at something, to not move immediately on. To do that, we can ask for an input and just say, hit enter to continue. All right, so because that's an input line, it's going to wait for input. We don't really care what the input is. We don't need to capture that input, so we don't have to set that input equal to something. This is the only time when we're using it for this purpose. This is the only time we won't set inputs equal to something. So now, the way this runs now, there's nothing that's going to stop us rolling. This program will go on forever and ever rolling the dice. So I'm going to, just to show you, we're going to move outside the function. This is a good stopping point. We're going to roll outside the function, and we are going to say run module. We'll say that. And says we rolled a 6 and a 1. Hit enter to continue. You rolled a 5 and a 2. Hit enter to continue. You rolled a 4 and a 5. Hit enter to continue, and so on. So that hit enter to continue pauses it so we can do it again. If we did not have that, let me just show you what will happen. I don't know if it's probably going to crash, but let's see. That's what's going to happen. It's going to continue forever and ever until I hit Control-C to kill it. It just started rolling and rolling and rolling. So that input is going to be important. All right. So we now have a way to roll a pair of dice. We will discuss more in the next video.